guys, this is lecture 14 and we continue to talk about economic growth in the sense of economic development. Before we go to another part, to people, how the citizens of particular country, what is their growth of their income and wealth, how we measure it and how it is contributed to overall countries' development. Let's finish with business and add a little bit of indicators. So just a quick recap, we have GDP, in particular GDP by industry, where we can see what industry contributes mostly to GDP. We link that to trade, and major parts are industrial production and agriculture production indexes, where we track agriculture and industries in particular. The way the index described in a per unit way. So we already know that. Now I'd like to also add capital expenditures, corporate capital expenditure, known as CAPEX, CAPEX. That's a very popular indicator among economists to measure investments. So it's a capital expenditures of corporations and companies. That stands for like approximation of a theoretical investments. So when we use investments in economic models, we'll always kind of use this word, but without particular indicator. And investments on stock market or in personal investments are not actually that type of economic investments that we use in our models. So CAPEX stands as close as it may get to that economic sense of investments. So there's data, and that indicator is very important for development and represents one of the sub-indicators under GDP that you can track and compare again to GDP dynamics, to other indicators, and see how the country is doing in terms of CAPEX. CAPEX is good also because it's usually like a leading indicator. So we have leading indicators and we have kind of following indicators. GDP is even though it's the most common indicator, it's a following one because it sums up and usually is published quite later. In a way, the leading indicator is those that kind of happen first, or at least published earlier. And investments in this particular example, they are leading because first you invest and then only after some time you get some benefit. So in a way, this leading sometimes in a couple years. So if today you made investments, your GDP might not grow, your industrial production might not grow, but in 2 years, those investments, you build a factory, the factory start producing goods, you have this economic impact. So CAPEX is very important as a leading indicator and kind of forecasting the path of economic growth. And another one is corporate profits. That's quite important as well. So when we're going to talk about people, we'll have wages. Corporate profits is the income of corporations. If it's going up, that's usually a benefit for the country. It indicates its development. However, recently, for the last maybe 15 years or even 20, we have a lot of globalization and we have a lot of financial planning, way more than it was before. Of course, that was used since the beginning of times, you may say. People avoid taxation, people use some kind of not accurate accounting. But in the recent 20 years, because of globalization and because of high technicality of financial sector, there are more opportunities for that, and it's became way more common. So companies like Amazon, Apple, many other high-tech companies as well as industrial companies, they have very low profits compared to their size of business. So they have a lot of revenues usually, they have a lot of actual money, they have a lot of cash, they have a lot of investments, but they tend their profits to be very moderate usually for taxation purpose, or sometimes because they especially high-tech companies, they invest a lot in future, so they kind of spend all their money for their investments. So formally, investments are done from your profit, but again, financial planning allows you to make it and plan in a way that you avoid taxation, so then it will not be a part of your profit. So that's a per company case. It's very hard to figure out whether the profits are actually representative for the economy. So, and in developing countries, quite often we have even larger problems with that, because in the United States, particularly in Europe, other developed countries, less, but in US you have a strong stock market, which allows companies to sell their stocks, they sell equity, attract financing using financial system. And for the stock market, profits are very crucial. So on one hand, you have companies that are not interested in attracting financing, so they keep profit lows. But on the other hand, in developed countries, US, you have a lot of companies that boost their profits and actually increase their beyond kind of a fair level to attract capital in the financial markets. In developing countries where you don't have such opportunities, more companies minimize their profits, and that's a problem. So, but still, it's an indicator of development, and when you analyze in time, it still presents some has some value, because yes, there is certain level of inaccuracy, but this level either stays the same, or if there is some political reform, you can see the boost, and then you can say, well, reform worked indeed, we have a boost in corporate profits, and mostly not to economic changes, but just there was some political reform and more companies became more transparent, recognize profits, and pay taxes. So that's an important indicator as well. Finishing with that, let's go to people. So for people, major indicator is median income and average income as well. So we use median income because pretty much all the countries in the world have inequality, and in many cases quite significant inequality. And because if you form an income distribution, you have what's called skewed to the right, or to the higher amount of income. So because you cannot go below zero symmetrically, so in the United States, if you have around $40,000 as your income, then you can, so from one side of distribution there will be zero, just 40,000, but from another one will be like $80,000. So, but we have people who earn millions, so that side of distribution goes to millions of dollars, which is way higher. So if you take an average, it might be inaccurate in a way that you have few people, or 1%, as you might heard in the news. Usually people use that. You have 99% of people and 1% of people, and compare those distribution in terms of income. So 1% of people might own millions of dollars, and then the average might be like $80,000, but no one, or most of people, do not earn $80,000. And when we talk about income, we want, when we say 40,000 or any amount of income, we want that income to be actual income of most of people, or at least the kind of average citizen. So that's where median income is more useful. Median income is the income of basically of average citizen, and it's more representative. When we say $40,000, this means there are a lot of people around $40,000. That's not surprising, and it's quite common. There are people go less, there are people go higher. But another thing, we have equal amount of people who earn less than median income and higher than median income. That's how the median is calculated. So median income is more important when we talk about income than average income. Average income actually is used to compare with median income and establish as a measure of inequality. So you can compare average income with a median income and see whether, if the difference is high, this means you have high inequality. If the difference is moderate, then it's fine, not high inequality. We already talked about inequality and it's important, so we won't stop here, but the median income as a factor of economic growth is pretty much second after GDP important indicator. So GDP is a general indicator, mostly for business. Median income represents how people feel that economic growth, whether they experience and share that growth or not. And for United States, that last 20 years, that's a huge problem, because before median income growth, before since again Second World War, so we historically measure our old data starting from Second World War, because prior to that we had different world. So from after Second World War up to 90s, late 80s, we had kind of comparable growth of GDP and median income. And that's the reason also why GDP wasn't that criticized, because yeah, you might, those theoretical arguments about how bad is GDP, they were present before. But when you have a high correlation with other indicators you want to track, then it's fine. Then we say, well, yeah, you want to track life expectancy, education, healthcare, but you want to check median income as well. But you see they're highly correlated, so we can just pick up GDP and go with it. What happened in the last 20 years, there is a big difference. We have corporate profits, in particular in financial sector, they skyrocket, while median income, it's incredible to believe, but median income had just 12% increase in last 20 years. So that's a huge problem. I actually might already mention that. And so we try, that's why it's important to have different indicators. So what we have and what we experienced in last years, we have success in terms of investment, in terms of business, more or less success. So it depends on industry, of course, but aggregated, we have successful business in the United States, and we have moderate, or if you adjust for prices, that's actually a decline. So people, you might hear it, and in particular from Joseph Stiglitz, who is one of the most recognized economists of nowadays. He had a Nobel Prize, but he also published a lot of really useful and practical books about new things in terms of inequality and economic growth. And that he brought to attention that fact that when people say they were richer in 80s than nowadays, that is actually supported by data. That's not some individual case or some people who lost, some guy who lost his job in some factory and some case. No, aggregated for United States, for a median income, that is actually true. Because if you again just for prices of education, just for prices of houses, you could afford more in 80s than you can afford now. And then counter argument, yes, say, well, we can afford computers now and you can afford that and a lot of new things. That's true, but that's not due to economic kind of system. That's mostly due to technological process, and those things are not that expensive compared to the increase of prices of, again, education, healthcare. So facts, really the median income, that's a huge problem for United States. Other countries have different situations. So in Europe, that's very interesting to compare Europe. So we saw that movie for a reason, Where to Invade Next. So we can compare how different it is. And I don't want you to believe that it's better. So the movie is kind of biased to the particular things that are better in Europe, but that's the goal, because there's the things that are better in the United States, the Michael Moore assume you know, so he wanted to show that there are things that you don't, or politicians don't say about that. There is another type of development, there are another qualitative things. So similar in this characteristic, median income in Europe is growing way higher kind of and better, but in some countries even exceeding GDP. Actually, in most countries exceeding GDP. But case of Italy, for example, is very interesting. They have decline in GDP, but growth in median income, which economically results in quite problematic situation with employment. So you don't have enough jobs and your business kind of struggling, but because of the social support, so in a way you have too much of social support, which is a burden for business in case of Italy. So that's what makes economic development a really problematic and hard topic. We don't have an absolute solution. Oh, do like that and that you're gonna be successful. No, if you just turn it a little bit too much, that's what happened in Italy. You put too much, you kind of set too high standards for social uh, life, which that does not allow business to catch up. You don't have enough entrepreneurship, you don't have enough business to support that high standards of living that you want to afford. And if you have this situation, you have a loop where your business is declining, but you still have this standard, so you have a high unemployment and those problems. While in US, you have the opposite situation. Business is thriving, we have a lot of rich people, we have a lot of rich corporations. Out of the whole world top 100 companies, if you exclude Chinese state companies, which they have a lot, but it's not really business, let's be honest, it's a state-owned company or state-owned banks that they're rich kind of by definition. But if you just take private companies out of 100, around 80, 70, 80 are US companies. Very few from Europe and some Japanese, Australian, Canadian. So this means that for a large business, US is the most kind of the nicest country, the best place to be. And the same for high-tech business, Silicon Valley is still the best place. So we have but in United States, we have the opposite. We have very low social standards, and the poorest live probably the worst out of all developed countries. So, and the trick with development is this balance between the way you do in US and the way you do in Italy. Both are not very successful kind of average for the people. However, you try to find a way that will benefit the business and benefit people. So, and median income, those indicators, they are simple, they have mistakes, but they tell you, because for the last 20 years, we have a tremendous dynamic. So some countries you might see that it's growing, but in fact not. So to understand the real situation in the country, you basically have to live there and meet people from that country, get different opinions. It's not an easy process, but what you can get is from data is still a lot. You can see the data from median income compared to business returns, corporate profits, capex, industrial production. You combine everything we are talking about in this set of lectures, you will know a lot already. Still not enough, but quite a lot to make a decision. So median income. Then we go to employment. Employment or unemployment, basically that's the indicator that tracks it. How many people are unemployed is one of the major indicators of development as well. So in countries, developing countries, usually there is high unemployment as well. There is no where, so there are two problems for development. So if you think, just leave everything aside and see why people are not developed. There are two possible situations. Either they don't have a job, so they just don't have any income, any sources to develop themselves, or they have a job but they are not paid enough. So just two reasons. If they have a job, they are paid fair amount of money on international level for this kind of job, then why shouldn't they be developed? It's not like, again, we have a high technological age, we have computer, internet, you can learn, you can buy. Relatively, average citizen with a productive job can afford a lot because of technological progress. So we are not living in like 50 years ago. You might argue with that. You might say, well, you might work hard, but still not afford a lot of things. Nowadays, 2017, 21st century, the goods are cheap. Everything is there due to technological progress that makes cost very low. An average citizen, an average working person, no matter where he works in the world, should be able to afford quite a lot, enough to have a decent life. But it's not the case for many countries. So not paid well enough, or there is no jobs. And for many developing countries, there are no jobs. So people might have some kind of either an official job or low quality of jobs, like they do farming for themselves, grow food, but actually they're engineers or some other their profession is high, or they could do more. And that's a more country by country place. So you have usually a mix of both. Due to political system, here we come to political system. There are often the case that people are not paid well enough in developing countries because there is no democracy. Democracy is very important to get that, to have, even it's kind of long path from a country to corporation to the way you got paid, but most countries, even US, has a huge government role in business, promoting competition or promoting monopoly. And if you don't have democratic government, if you have autocratic government, usually it is supported by large monopolies. So it's a symbiotic relationship between large business and autocratic government that prevent any kind of competition, in particular also competition from people for the capital. So if you have a state company like in United States or in China, state banking sector, there is no competition for in this particular sector. So if you are in bank in China, then they might pay you quite low wage because you don't have any bargaining power. You cannot go to a private company or a better bank and work there. So in this case, there might be such kind of so the company has all the bargaining power and basically pays you what they want. They might, I don't know the case in China and bankers, maybe they paid quite well, but still I bet not enough compared to international level, where they can easily switch to a private company, and then the most effective company will pay a higher wage and get the market and get the best people. That is not happening in many developing countries in many fields as well. It's very hard to open business. If you can see the ranking of countries, we're going to talk about it next week. some rankings of countries for business, and you see that most developing countries are very poor in organizing. The government is not very supportive, sometimes the opposite. They try to tax business or even prevent some kind of business. There is corruption, a lot of unnecessary things that prevent competition. And again, that's either officially not democratic, you have autocracy that is supported by monopoly business that prevents other business, or you have like a democracy officially, but it looks like democracy. You have different parties, but in a way, the system itself is not very, again, democratic. There is no competition. That's a key. So technically, there is no direct relationship between democracy and economic development, but there is a step-by-step link. If you have democracy, you have competition, more or less, or at least there is a chance for competition. If you have autocratic government, usually it tries to get all, it's kind of logical, it tries to get all the good things. So high profitable business is one of the best things to have, to own. So if you're autocratic governor, you will target high profitable business. Then you will think, well, not much less. So high profitable business is either brains or resources. So it's either high tech or it's resource based, but it's run out very fast. And with high tech, there is a problem. You need smart people, and smart people don't want to work for, in that conditions we are talking about. They don't want to, just be like in prison and have no bargaining power. So they just leave and go to another country with a company that negotiate and allow you to feel like have equal power with negotiation of your wage and working conditions. And resources run out fast. So what is common in developing countries? They create an artificially high profitable business. First, the customs. Everything that imported in many countries is controlled by the government because the custom belongs to the government. And in developed country, in US, you don't think about it. You import goods from Japan, there are certain rules, you fill the paper, your shipment arrives to United States, you do your business. Well, appreciate this because in half of the world, you buy something from Japan, you try to ship it, on the customer government officer comes to you and say, well, that's a nice stuff, I need a certain amount of money, officially, unofficially, whatever. And in many cases, if it's highly demanded goods, computers or clothes or branded stuff, luxury things, the government just said, well, I will be, or they point a person and said, this guy will import everything from this, let's say, all the luxury cars will be imported by this guy appointed by the government. And all other cars are not just letting in. You don't even you can't even buy it. It just, customs will not allow your goods inside the country. And it's good to be from Ukraine, you have a lot of experience. So that's a case in Ukraine and pretty much all developing countries. They have this kind of power, the government, and they try to use it. And so imported goods, then you have, again, try to connect. Everything related to land requires government regulation. Everything related to construction requires government permits. And so everywhere where the government has a leverage in autocratic system, the government takes the money, which leads to poor people. So this idea that poor people work less, rich people work hard, and that's how it is, that's such a naive fairy tale that just could be from people who never ever seen anything in the world. I believe that's just ridiculous, because in a democratic country, that might be true. If you have all the opportunities, idealistically, so friendly speaking, even with the United States, you can argue whether it's true or not, but I leave it to you. But in a democratic country with a fair government, more or less, that allows you opportunities, that's true. If you work hard, you can be successful with some help, some being smart and maybe help with your parents. You can be successful, and if you don't work, if you're lazy, then you're not successful. Then this is true. While in countries where the autocratic regime, that is not true. If you're born a son of an important person, you will be successful. They will make you successful. If you are even the smartest guy, it doesn't mean you'll be successful. You might get a job where you produce a lot, but you don't get a lot because everything is harvested by the government. And Ukraine was a perfect case because we had a very high level of education, a lot of engineers, and tons of smart people, but we had autocratic government that in Soviet Union that control that smart people. So people like won Nobel prizes in physics. People built spaceships. People built everything. They were not paid. We have a famous surgeon from Ukraine who was one of the first brain surgeons in the world and made operation no one else in the world could make, and his salary was something like $100 a month, and he has just a tiny apartment, and he couldn't get more because everything, all the benefits were kind of sucked by the controlling state. So democracy for this in this part is very important. So you need to link. If you see the median income, you analyze the people's part or what's their role in this development. You need to link it to the type of country you have. If it's a democratic country, the people can compete, can realize themselves, can get a fair share of fair payment for their work. That's one thing. And the other things, especially in this course, we're talking more about developing countries. You need to think, well, yeah, they're poor, but why they're poor? Are they in Africa, for example, as I already mentioned in previous lecture, there are different type of poor. People poor in Africa who would never had any education in some parts of it. It's different from poor people in Cuba or poor people in Ukraine or other countries where you had some education, but you have very autocratic government that does not allow you to succeed. So everything is different country by country base, and when you analyze a particular country, you need to pay attention to everything. So what else we have? Well, employment. Yeah, unemployment is a very important stuff as well with income. So you can see unemployed people, a lot of unemployed people in Europe, as I said, because of high standards. And also those countries are usually that are kind of poor in terms of employment. It's a vacation destination. So you have Greece, Spain, Portugal, and Italy, southern Italy in particular. Those are the places where Europeans go for vacation. So easy to see in Hawaii. And in such places, as I mentioned before, a lot of people just rent houses to tourists. They do some, small business related to tourism unofficially. So to really get the sense of actual employment is very hard. Yeah, officially, as in Spain, 50% of young people from 22 to 30 are unemployed, but realistically, it's not the case. They do something. It's not just a stable job in the office with a paycheck every day, but they still do something. And that's a bit of a problem for us to analyze because it's not statistically reported. It's very hard. Same in Greece. I was there for 2 months of my life. Very interesting country. You go to Athens, you see some poor people, some problems, protests, job, all those problems. You go outside to the beach area, uh, everyone is fine. Yeah, they're not super rich. They don't have like villas, but they have quite a good life. They have houses. Houses are relatively cheap because there are plenty of space and not much of demand because everyone is relatively poor, so no one buys that. You can get a house. Everyone is there. I don't think I remember any homeless people outside of city. Yeah, there are agriculture, olive trees. It's a hard job, but you have hotels, small business, and people quite happy. They don't seem very despair, even though or very poor. And they actually don't seem poor at all. So that's a different type of life, and behind they are not there with numbers. Our statistics again quite poor, so you need to understand whether the real situation is how bad it is. If it's not in numbers, if your statistics say, well, we have like 30% unemployed, doesn't mean they're like sitting on the street and doing nothing, just protesting. No, most of them have something, uh, do something and have some kind of living. And I think the failure of European Union policies, a lot of them, particularly related to Greece, is fail to understand the difference between Greece economy and Germany economy. Those are different type of industries, different type of countries. So when the Germans try to impose some kind of work ethics and economic policies that worked for them on Greece, it's like trying to implement taxes policy in Hawaii. That's a bit ridiculous to do. So, and unfortunately, there is not much of balancing approach and a lot of issues due to that. But I can assure you, people in Greece, most of them are not that poor as you might hear from the news. Well, that would be all for people. And then part three, we're gonna combine and talk about uh, combination of business people and whatever growth strategies we have. So that will be all. Good luck.